Sending up on the inside. Wait. No.
Oh ya, apa sudah di pick up? Audio city-nya dikasih di نجري الحوار بيننا إن شاء الله. لا كان نتكلم عربية وبالعندنا بعض الأساتذة وبعض الإخوة الذي يتكلم
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam wa rasulillah. We could begin the discussion or sharing of thoughts here with hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which stated talabul ilmi farida, knowledge is an obligation on every Muslim. So for us to be able to benefit society, we have to start somewhere. That start has to be based on knowledge. Based on ignorance, then we will not end where we intended to end somewhere else. Get lost on the way. Must have knowledge, clear knowledge. Of course, the ultimate utilize this world in a way which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and at the same time keeping with the way or methodology, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
إذا فهمنا هذا فالعلم هو فضل من الله الذي يؤتيه إلى عباده من يشاء. أليس كذا؟
صحيح، ولكن إذا نظرنا إلى العلم كفضل من الله أو نقول هذا، ولا شك أنه فضل من الله، لكن لما نقول هذا كأننا نقول أن الله سبحانه وتعالى لم يتفضل على الناس الآخرين بدون علم، وقد يكون ليس من أجل تقصيرهم، يعني لأن ظروف الناس مختلف. So when we say that knowledge is a favor, fadl, is a favor from Allah, it's true in the general sense, but we don't want people to think, people who don't have knowledge, that Allah hasn't favored you. You know, you're left out. The favor is only for the ulama. No. Allah has favored everybody. So the knowledge is of many, many different types. Although somebody may not be favored with, knowledge of fiqh, they may be favored with knowledge of medicine. And one can say yes, because fiqh is connected with proper knowledge of the world in which we live and how to utilize this world in a way which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and at the same time keeping with the way or methodology, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
إذا فهمنا هذا فالعلم هو فضل من الله الذي يؤتيه إلى عباده من يشاء. أليس كذلك؟
صحيح، ولكن إذا نظرنا إلى العلم كفضل من الله أو نقول هذا، ولا شك أنه فضل من الله.
نعم.
لكن لما نقول هذا كأننا نقول أن الله سبحانه وتعالى لم يتفضل على الناس الآخرين بدون علم. وقد يكون ليس من أجل تقصيرهم.
نعم.
لأن ظروف الناس مختلف. So when we say that knowledge is a favor, fadl, it is a favor from Allah. It's true in the general sense, but we don't want people to think, people who don't have knowledge, that Allah hasn't favored you. You're left out. The favor is only for the ulama. No, Allah has favored everybody. So the knowledge is of many, many different types. So though somebody may not be favored with, knowledge of fiqh, they may be favored with knowledge of medicine.
Okay.
And one can say yes, because fiqh is connected with knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what He wishes for us. This has a special place. It does have a special place. And that's why we're told to respect those who are knowledgeable and those who are older, who have greater knowledge from having lived longer.
نعم. فإذا فهمنا أنه من فضل الله فعلينا أن نحاول في تحصيله.
صحيح.
Masya Allah.
Nah.
Baik. Mungkin teman-teman kalau mau menyampaikan sesuatu bisa langsung saja.
So we are encouraged to seek this knowledge. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said it was an obligation.
Okay.
He didn't just say, seek the knowledge, it's good for you, etc. He said it's an obligation. Farida. This is like salah. 5 times daily prayer. Seeking knowledge is on that level of obligation.
Enggak, langsung aja kita ngobrol. طيب فإذا فهمنا أن طلب العلم هو الواجب فهل هذا بمعنى كل العلم أو فيه بعض العلم الذي لا يسع المسلم جهله وعليهم أن يتعلموا هذا العلم خاصة؟
الواجب من العلم هو كما قلت لا يسعى للإنسان جهله، لكن هذا ليس في علم الدين فقط. لأن الناس أحيانا people think that it is the religious knowledge which is the obligatory knowledge. But it is, in general, whatever knowledge is necessary to make our lives beneficial lives, lives which are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's all obligatory. As long as we are able. Because of course, even ilmuddin, knowledge of the religion, if one isn't able to access it, then the obligation is removed from them.
Okay.
Right.
إذن العلم الواجب لا ينحصر بالعلم الشرعي بل كل علم الذي يخدم الناس. ما شاء الله. بارك الله فيكم. طيب. فإذا نتعلم بالعلم الواجب فما علينا بعده؟
العمل بالعلم.
العمل بالعلم.
No. Because knowledge, if you don't act on it, then it becomes a source of punishment for you.
Okay.
You are held accountable. You had the knowledge, you didn't utilize it, you didn't benefit yourself and people, your family, etc. Then Allah will hold you accountable.
بالنسبة لحديث النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يكون في الناس مفتاحا للخير ومبلغا للشر فماذا عليه حتى يتكون نفسه حتى صار مفتاحا للخير ومغلاقا للشر؟
هو يعني لا ينحصر، ما نستطيع أن نحدد عموما للناس جميعا ما هو مفتاح للخير. لأن الذي قد يكون مفتاح للخير في أهلك وفي ظروفك لا تكون مفتاح عندي، يكون غير. يعني so to try to limit what brings about good to a particular set of knowledge based information, we don't want to exclude people in different circumstances, because what may be good for you may not be the most important. It will be good for everybody. In general, if it's good for you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's good for everybody. But it may not be the most important good. So we're talking about issues of prioritization. Because what you may need to do first may be different from what I need to do first. Because my situation is different and it has different demands. So what's most important for me is what helps me complete what my responsibilities are. And there's overlapping. But why I'm saying this is that we want to avoid, making narrow what Allah made wide and vast. Yeah. We try to keep, Allah has opened that door. The good, the Jannah. The Jannah that Adam was in. The door was open to him completely. You only had to avoid the one tree. But we have that problem, what is unknown, creates a desire to want to know it, and so we will step over the bounds as a result of it.
فإذا نتعلم العلم وبدأنا بما يحتاج أنفسنا ثم أهلنا ثم المجتمع حولنا هكذا.
أيوة صحيح، يعني لابد أن تبدأ بنفسك.
نعم.
We have to begin with ourselves, first and foremost, and then those around us, because كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. So we have that responsibility to the families, and then to the community. So naturally, we give priority to where we should begin, but we shouldn't begin in such a way that we don't get past the beginning. Some people become very, keyed in and locked in the beginning stage, and they never seem to get past the beginning stage. So we don't have to learn everything about what's in the beginning before we can move on. We start at a point, but we add to it. We don't just restrict ourselves just to that point only. يعني لابد أن ننظر يعني إلى ما بعد الأوليات. ننظر إلى الأوليات، يعني لابد أن نبدأ بها، لكن لا نركز كل جهودنا في الأوليات، فيمر سنوات ولسنا يعني ما زلنا في الأوليات. هذه المشكلة يعني.
طيب، وهل هذا من معنى مفتاح الخير للناس الذي يتعلم ويتركز في ما يحتاج لنفسه ولأهله ولم يبالي في أحوال الناس؟
لا، لابد أن يبالي. لا يستطيع يعني أن يركز كل الخير في نفسه وأهله، لأن الأهل يعيش في مجتمع يستفيد من المجتمع، والمجتمع يستفيد منهم. هذا هو الطريقة السليمة الصحيحة. So the family should always, it comes first, yourself first, then your family, but you can't leave your responsibility to the society. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ had said, Yadullah ala al-jama'ah. Allah's hand, His support is on the community as a whole. And sometimes the community's need becomes more important even than the individual's need.
طيب، فإذا أراد الرجل بعد أن يفهم أن العلم الواجب هو العلم الذي يحتاج نفسه ويحتاج أهله ويحتاج الناس، فهل عليه أن يتعلم العلم مقررا في مدرسة ما أو في جامعة خاصة، ويبدأ من بداية العلم حتى يكون خريج في جامعة؟
إذا أمكن فهو خير، ولكن ليس للكل. يعني من الصحابة من هو لم يتجاوز يعني فلاح يعني مع أنه يعني كان يصلي الصلوات الخمسة يعني الأساسيات، الأمور الأساسية، لكن يعني ظروف التي وضع الله سبحانه وتعالى الناس فيها يعني تختلف. نعم،
الظروف تختلف إن شاء الله. عندكم شيء؟
يعني أحيانا شيخ بعض الناس لا يريد أن يطلب العلم. لماذا؟ لأن إذا طلب العلم عنده مسؤول العمل. إذا طلب العلم عنده مسؤول العمل. إذا طلب العلم يعني لابد بالعمل، وإلا فعندهم
كراهية
هكذا. هل هذا موقف صحيح؟
لا، غلط. هذا غلط. يعني to avoid getting knowledge because you know that the knowledge is going to make you responsible, this is actually from shaitan. This is the idea put in your head from shaitan, right? Because and I've come across people like that too, where circumstance arises and You try to advise them in the good. No, don't tell me. Don't tell me. I prefer not to hear it. You know, as long as I haven't heard it, I'm not held responsible for it. But of course, you know, Allah, you can't play games with Allah.
ما شاء الله. أنك تعيش مع الكفار في بلاد الكفرية.
عشت أعيش في قطر.
ما شاء الله. لا في أمريكا؟
لا.
نعم ما شاء الله.
أنا ولدت في أمريكا.
نعم.
يعني ونشأت يعني إلى حد جامعة في أمريكا في الغرب، وجزء من الحياة كان حتى في سابا.
ما شاء الله.
أنا كنت في سابا 4 سنوات.
سابا في ماليزيا.
ماليزيا نعم.
4 سنوات.
لا it's actually صباح.
صباح.
Yeah, it's really صباح. يعني
سابا سراواك ماليزيا.
نعم.
مدة 4 سنوات.
4 سنوات.
ولا تتكلم بالملايو؟
لا ما أتكلم.
طيب.
نعم. وهناك كذلك يعني أمي تبنت ولد إندونيسي.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله.
فكان يعيش معنا في العائلة يعني كأخ. نعم. وكنا نراه يصلي يعني لأنه كان يصلي
ما شاء الله.
يعني الصلوات ال5 كان ملتزم فيه، وكنا نراه ونستغرب ايش يسوي، ايش هذا بيني وبين اخي واختي.
نعم.
وكنا نتساءل يعني ماذا يسوي
قبل دخولك في الإسلام؟
نعم بسنوات. نعم لما عشت في صباح يعني ولاية صباح يعني 4 سنوات قضيت معه، وأرى أمي في رمضان تستيقظ مبكرا وتعد السحور له.
ما شاء الله.
وإذا أكلنا خنزير هي كانت تعد له سمك.
ما شاء الله.
نعم. كنا نراه ونرى هذه الأعمال وما كنا نفهم لماذا. فما عرفت أنه مسلم إلا بعد سنوات، يعني ممكن بعد هذا بتقريبا 6 سنوات.
ما شاء الله.
وأنا في كندا وأسلمت، يعني آنذاك عرفت أنه مسلم، وكان مسلم يعيش معنا في العائلة، ولكن لم يدعونا لم يشرح لنا ولا شيء يعني، وكان يعني خجلان يعني. هذا كان في الستينات. يا نعم.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله.
قبل ولادتكم يعني.
طيب. فمثل هذا هو يعرف أن الإسلام هو حق، ويعرف ما واجباته إلى الله.
أيوة.
يعبد بنفسه ولا يعلم الناس حتى معك، يسكن معك ويعيش معك ولا يشرح
ولمت لما أسلمت وعرفت يعني قابلته وكان فرحان في لما يعني عرف أني أسلمت، ولكن هو كان فرحان جدا. أنا كنت ألومه، ليش أنت كم سنة يعني عشت معنا طول هذا الوقت ويعني لم تخبرنا، لم تشرح لنا. You know, you didn't explain to me, to us, to the rest of the family, why you didn't. So he said, you know, I was just shy. I felt, you know, your mother is taking care of me, brought me into the family and everything. So if I go and say something to you, maybe it will, you know, create problems in the family. You know, I said, that's not a good excuse. For you, it might have seemed that way, but it was not a good excuse. Because your duty is to share Islam with whoever you can. That's your duty.
طيب. وقبل دخولك في الإسلام وعند ما تسكن في كندا تعرف ما عادة الكفار. ما هو الأساس الذي يمنعهم في دخول الإسلام وفي في ماذا يشرح صدره للإسلام؟
في العموم هو الجهل. الجهل هذا في العموم، لأن الناس لا يعرفون ما هو الإسلام، يعني ما يرون ما هو الإسلام إلا من نظارة اليهود.
نعم.
اليهود مسيطرين على وسائل الإعلام،
ما شاء الله،
وهم يعني ركزوا في تشويه صورة الإسلام فيها. The Jews are very much active in the media, whether it's Hollywood or Bollywood or whatever. They're very much active, and they utilize the media to present a distorted picture of what Islam is. So the average non-Muslim, thinks of Islam as being crazy. This guy riding off the desert with a big sword in his hand, one hand, is coming to get you, This is لهذا السبب يعني أساسي، لأن أكيد لو فتح الأبواب للناس للتعرف بما هو الإسلام حقيقة لدخلوا أفواجا كما دخلوا يعني قديما
المشركين.
نعم.
ما شاء الله. طيب، فما هو السبب لدخولك في الإسلام؟
سبب دخولي في الإسلام, my reason for accepting Islam was having thought what I thought was the best way of life of human beings.
Okay.
In communism, شيوعية. No. This is what after doing my own research, this is what I was exposed to when I was in university in Canada. And I became a communist, thinking that it was the best way, to make society responsible for each other and people to live peacefully, etc., etc. This is what I thought from what I was told. And after finding out and realizing, studying history, that communism wasn't the answer. Communism was not able to compete with capitalism. If it were the answer, then it would, this is how one would think. And also, of course, non-Muslims may look at Islam in the same way. That, look, Muslims are all backward and so on and so on. What they have can't be of any good, or can't be of any use. But it's just their ignorance of the good that's there. Whereas in communism, I saw what was good, but I also saw what was evil in communism. وبعض الإخوة يعني شرحوا لي نقاط الغموض، فيها غموض حتى أعرف يعني حقيقة الشيوعية. وبعد دراسة يعني الأديان الأخرى والمذاهب الأخرى سياحية يعني وصلت إلى حد قرأت كتاب محمد قطب. محمد قطب.
أي كتاب؟
دكتور محمد قطب.
دكتور محمد قطب.
نعم. كتابه شبهات حول الإسلام. نعم. In English it was translated as Islam the Misunderstood Religion. فهو عمل مقارنة بين الإسلام والشيوعية والرأسمالية وهندوسية، ويعني كل الأديان والأفكار السياسية.
نعم.
سياسية. فبعد أن قرأت هذا الكتاب يعني وصلت إلى حد أن كل الشر التي في المذاهب المختلفة ليست موجود في الإسلام.
كل الشر في المذاهب مختلفة لا يوجد في الإسلام.
لا توجد في الإسلام. وكل الخير
ما شاء الله
التي في كل هذه المذاهب كلها موجود في الإسلام.
ما شاء الله.
يعني أسلمت
الحمد لله. ما شاء الله. كما عرفنا أن أهل الغرب الكفار الذين لا يأبؤون بالدين إذا دخلوا في الإسلام دخلوا مجردا، يعني أنهم ليس عندهم الحث في زيادة العلم في الإسلام، وليس عندهم ليس عندهم الإرادة في تعلم الإسلام. مع أنك بعد دخولك في الإسلام وعندك الحث في زيادة العلم والتعلم حتى تكون شيخا وأستاذا.
يعني بعد إسلامي يعني بدأت أبحث عن العلم في الإسلام، لأني كنت أريد أن أعرف الإسلام يعني من أسسها، يعني من ألف إلى
ياء.
لكن في ذاك الوقت الجماعة اللي حولي اللي كانوا حولي في ذاك الوقت كان جهال، لا أحد منهم عنده يعني علم شرعي جيد، هم ناس عاديين. So the people who I met around me after I accepted Islam were common people who didn't have any real background in Islam. They were just practicing what we call cultural Islam.
Culturalism.
Yeah. What they learned in their families, what their parents did, what their relatives did, what their society did, that's what they knew of Islam. So naturally, when I met people from India, Pakistan, from Egypt, from Morocco, from Nigeria, from different places, I kept getting different explanations for things, you know. And I realized that this can't be Islam. So at that point, I decided I needed to leave Canada and go overseas to study Islam. Because just one example that really brought it home for me is that what I had gained from those around me, you know, or as they told it, in Islam, you had to follow a madhab. Right? There are 4 madhabs, and you had to follow one. And when I asked them, well, okay, which one? They said, well, you can choose. But Abu Hanifa was the first Imam. And the majority of Muslims are Hanafis.
وهذا عند تعلمك في جامعة؟ هذا عند تعلمك في جامعة؟
لا هذا من الناس يعني في كندا قبل أن قررت الذهاب والخروج من كندا. فهذا كان الكلام يعني بين الناس عاديين، جماعة التبليغ يعني هذا يعني استفدنا منهم من حيث قراءة القرآن، ولكن من هذه الناحية ما استفدنا. أنا قلت خلاص إذا أنا حنفي، I'll be a Hanafi, you know, since they're the most, and you know, the first Imam was Abu Hanifa. He was the first of the four.
You choose first Imam.
So, but then when I started to study with those, there were a few who came over, became Imams of masjids, but they weren't really ulama.
Yeah.
But they had ilm, they had some knowledge. And I first looked at Hanafi fiqh, I tried to go through it. And then I looked at Shafi'i fiqh, tried to go through it. And I noticed that in Hanafi fiqh, if you accidentally touch a woman, your wudu is gone. No, sorry, it's not gone. It doesn't, not gone. It doesn't affect it. If you accidentally touch a woman, or even deliberately, it doesn't break your wudu. But in Shafi'i fiqh, if you accidentally touch a woman, your wudu is gone. So now, if both madhabs are correct, because that's what they said, you had to choose one out of the four.
Okay.
And it didn't matter which one you choose. Yeah, whichever one you chose, it's okay because they're all correct.
They all correct.
They're all correct. يعني كل الأربعة يعني كل واحد منهم صحيح بنفسه. يعني. So if that was the case, then this raised a big question in my mind. That it means that you could have wudu and not have wudu at the same time. Right?
Okay.
According to Hanafi, you had wudu. Shafi'i, you don't have wudu. So what's the reality? Is it possible to have wudu and not have wudu at the same time? غير معقول. أنا قلت يعني لو قبلت هذا يعني أكون مثل النصارى الذين قبلوا أن واحد زائد واحد زائد واحد يساوي واحد. Yeah. It's completely illogical. فقررت في ذاك الوقت أنني لا بد من السفر إلى منبت الإسلام.
ما شاء الله.
المدينة نحاول بقدر الاستطاعة حتى نحصل هناك.
So this is the best motivation for you.
That was for me, yes, the motivation.
ما شاء الله. بارك الله فيكم. ثم بعد أن تكون شيخا وداعيا وصرت في أنحاء العالم يبث الإسلام إلى الناس، وأنت تشرع في بناء الجامعة، فماذا هو الحث الأساسي والهمة الأساسية في هذا؟
يعني الحث الأساسي هو بلغوا عني ولو آية.
إن شاء الله. حديث النبي صلى الله
عليه وسلم. يعني the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, convey whatever you learn from me, even if it's only one verse from the Quran. وخيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه. Best of you are those who learn the Quran and teach it to others. So those two principles became the guiding principles for my studies and my life after studies. Conveying this is the da'wah, conveying the learning, the message to others.
طيب.
إن شاء الله.
ولماذا تتكون جامعة؟ فعندنا مثل الذكر ليس عنده جامعة، ومجتمع عنده جامعة ليس عنده جامعة. أنت الوحيد الذي
لا ما نقول أنا الوحيد، قد يكون ناس آخرين، فممكن الذي أنت تعرفه، أما غيري
هناك غير؟
غيرك يعني غيرك يعني بنوا أنشأوا جامعات.
الداعية من الخارج من بلاد الغرب الذي يتكلم بالإنجليزية
يعني حمزة يوسف.
حمزة يوسف.
نعم عنده
حمزة يوسف
جامعة.
من أين؟
أمريكا.
أمريكا. عنده جامعة.
عنده جامعة
ما شاء الله.
يعني جامعة صوفية ولكن جامعة.
بارك الله فيك. هل عندكم أشياء؟ تفضل. تفضل. لو سمحت. هذا الشيخ ويرا مندري بخرون أحد المدرسين في هذه القناة.
First of all, I'm very happy to meet you here. Ahlan wa sahlan in Yogyakarta. I only heard your lesson maybe about 20 years ago. You know, Abu Amina. We already know Abu Amina, Dawood Adib, you know, Musa reflection. But the most interesting thing that you have converted a lot of U.S. Army in the map or in the first Gulf War. And I met one of them in Yemen when I studied in Yemen. A brother came from Philadelphia. His name is Abu Talib. He said that I've been converted by
Bilal.
Dr. Abu Amina Bilal. So how is the strategy to convert 3,000 people? What did you do there? So they become a Muslim and they become a good Muslim. We want to know that your experience to convert the U.S. Army there when the first Gulf War.
Well, first let me say it is not just me.
Not you.
There was a group of people who were engaged. I was one among a group.
Mashallah.
You know, alhamdulillah, the effort was by Allah's qadr. Actually, the brother who began the effort to make da'wah, a brother, a Saudi brother, was a sergeant in the Saudi army. He began the da'wah without knowing hardly any English. Hardly knowing any. And, you know, people were considering and accepting Islam just based on his akhlaq. But he wanted to do much more because, you know, it was very slow. The way of akhlaq is very slow. People get to know you and to understand, and, you know, but he wanted to reach out to others. So he asked around to find out who can I get to help me with this. And they eventually told him, go to this one, go to that one, go to that. And then they said, go to Bilal Phillips in Riyadh. I was in Riyadh at the time. So I came back with him and began da'wah. The war broke out. I had to stop. Then they fought, but the war was very short, 1 week, 7 days, something. It was all over. And then it was now time for them to go back to America. So they had been given a location by the Saudi government to occupy as an encampment for themselves as they were being processed back out of the country. And some officers from the Saudi military, Air Force, they spoke with the heads of the American military and asked them, you know, permission to set up some tents and explain to the people about the culture and the way of Saudi Arabia, what it's, you know, like tourist approach, you know. So they said, fine, good, go ahead. So they, you know, got myself and others who were in Saudi Arabia. Some were still students in Medina University. Some were people I met on Hajj, which came then. Some were in Riyadh, and we got a group together, and we set up there a big tent, which was called the Saudi Arabian Cultural Information Tent. Saudi Arabian Cultural Information Tent. Not Dawah Tent. No. Cultural Information Tent. And we had a big table inside the tent with cultural information about the deserts, about the different civilizations of Saudi Arabia, the animals, the plants, and all this kind of thing. But in the middle of them, there would be some brochures. What is Islam? Who was Muhammad? And so and so and so. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So this was a cover, right? We didn't want to do open da'wah because they would have shut it down very quickly. So it was left that way. What would happen, they would bring in maybe about 100, 150 from the troops at a time. They would come in and they would sit in some stands that were there, and I would sit in front of them, distance away, like from here to where you are. And I would begin by explaining to them about something of Saudi history and, culture and so on. And of course, I would mention Islam, because Islam is everywhere in Saudi culture, so-called Saudi culture. And what would happen is that sometimes in the course of explaining, some of them would want to argue about Christianity, right? Because they had already had an idea of what Saudi Arabia was. It's, very, in their mind, it was backward. It was all these other things. And Islam, they were very harsh. So when they asked me, I would try to give them explanations. But some of them would want to argue about Christianity. Now, the majority that came were not interested in arguing about Christianity. So we had already decided in the very beginning, before we started, that we would have somebody else ready for them to have that discussion, but not in the main tent where we were. We had a second tent, so when these issues of Christianity and Christian argumentation came up, I would say, this is not the place for that discussion. We're talking culture. And so you can go down to the end of the tent there. You can go through there. Somebody will sit and explain for you. Yeah.
Strategy.
Yeah. Because we don't want to turn it into a religious debate and argument. We didn't want to do that. Because for the mass of people, they weren't interested. So the one who was waiting for them in the tent was a former Christian missionary who converted. Yes, he studied the missionary work in Sri Lanka. He was actually Sri Lankan. Had a big beard. He looked like a holy man, right? Anyway, he had studied about missionary work in different parts of the world and completed his course. When he completed his course, he was supposed to be posted in a country of his choice. So he asked the people at the college where he studied, which country are the people most difficult to convert to Christianity? Yeah. They said, Saudi Arabia. You know, to get a Saudi to convert to Christianity is just like, you know, don't even think about it, you know. So he said, that's where I want to go. And he was, you know, hardcore, ready to take it on, you know. So he went to Saudi Arabia as an accountant, because this is the cover. They don't come in and say, we're missionaries coming to convert your people, right? They came in as an accountant. And after he got there, he said, okay, the first thing I need to do is I need to get a Quran and study it carefully. Because he had studied verses from the Quran, etc., in his missionary work, but they were selected verses. He didn't realize that they were deliberately selected, but they were selected verses to twist his mind and make him think Islam is illogical or, you know, or harsh, or it's this or it's that, whatever. So he got the Quran translation, and he had to look around for a while. He got one, English translation, and he began to read it. And he kept on it till he completed the whole Quran.
MashaAllah.
And he went back through it a second time. By the time he had finished the second time, he was ready for Shahada. He was looking, where can I give my Shahada? You know, they sent him to Qasim, to one of the shuyukh who were there. He had a dawah center there, so they trained him there. And then after they gave him enough training, about 6 months or something like this, they let him go. You know, they said, okay, you're working for us now.
MashaAllah.
Right. So, alhamdulillah, he used to be, you know, you could say a dynamo of dawah, a dawah dynamo. He used to come, he traveled around Saudi Arabia, and he used to come into Riyadh. When he came into Riyadh, he used to come to visit me. And the airport was about half an hour's drive from my house where I lived. Yeah. So inevitably, whenever he came to Riyadh, back to Riyadh, he would drive to my house and he would bring the taxi driver in with him to take Shahada.
MashaAllah.
Inevitably. Every time. I mean, mostly they were Filipinos. Mostly Filipinos. Yeah. Half an hour, he had them. You know.
MashaAllah.
So, mashallah, he was as I said, a da'wah dynamo, and fully experienced in the Christian way of thinking and all of this. So he would be waiting for them in the tent. The tent at the end, when I would say, okay, you can carry out that, you know, religious debate or discussion, you can do it in the tent. He was waiting for them in the tent. Yeah, still alive. Still alive. He's back he went back to Sri Lanka. But what his main strategy was, favorite strategy, was when the people would come in, say, yeah, we want to talk about, you know, Jesus and Jesus being God and Trinity, and, you know, we want to get into the... So he'd first ask them, which Bible do you want to discuss it in? They would say, what do you mean, which Bible? It's just one Bible. He would have a suitcase with him.
MashaAllah.
Open it up, there would be about 17 or 18 different copies of the Bible. People, what? We never knew about this. Eh? All English, yeah. This is not other languages. All English, the different versions of the Bible. You've got so many that have been written. You know, so he would break that open for them.
How much
They would be
difference?
shocked. Huh?
How much difference? 70.
No, 17. Some places around
17.
17 or 18, something like this.
MashaAllah.
Numbers. So they would be there. They would pick it up and look at it. You never heard about that one. That's what people are believing, because 7 Days Adventists, you know, Jehovah's Witness, all of these guys have made up their own
Mashallah.
translations of the Bible. So there's a bunch of them. So that's what he would do, because that was really the shock. He shocked them. What? After that, it was easy, But alhamdulillah, in the course of 5 months, the work that we were doing in the main tent, along with what our brother was doing there, 3,000 accepted Islam. Alhamdulillah. And I was tasked with following up with them, with the Air Force headquarters in Riyadh. After the Gulf War was over, they'd been mostly out. I went back there. I worked in the Air Force headquarters, religious affairs department, and was, because when they were leaving, we would give them numbers of the nearest masjid or the nearest community, etc. So I would call up and check to see if they had made the contact, or call the community. Did you hear from this one or that one?
ما شاء الله عمل كبير عمل كبير ولكن غير مشهور
ها؟
هو غير مشهور
غير مشهور يعني مشهور لمن يبحث.
What's your name? What's your name?
Dawah in Desert Storm. Oh, who are you talking about?
Okay.
The Dai. The
Sri Lanka Da'i.
Is that what you're asking about?
Yes.
اسم الداعية السريلانكي؟
Yes.
اسمه؟
No.
It's been a long time now.
ما شاء الله.
Yeah.
له عمل كبير جهود كبير ولكن غير مشهور.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly his name, but I can get it if you want it.
Okay, إن شاء الله. تقبل الله
You're gonna
عمله.
invite him here to come and do some da'wah for you.
Okay.
Here in the country.
إن شاء الله. بارك الله فيكم. طيب ada yang lain Ustaz? تفضل. Please speak in this.
Refer to the previous questions. Maybe the American army they have the curiosity about Arabian things. But let me see in a smaller circle, in our relatives or our family, how to convince them to, you said before about the prioritizing things, and the priority is knowledge, getting a lesson. How to convince our families, the relatives, that they have to start from the knowledge. How to
Well,
spread.
let me say that after I accepted Islam, I gave da'wah to my parents. For 21 years. 21 years. And then they accepted Islam. Okay? So what does that tell you? What is the first quality that you have to have?
صبر.
Patience.
Patience.
Yes, patience. Sabr. Because إنما عليك البلاغ إنما علينا البلاغ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that it was his responsible. علينا الحساب عليك البلاغ وعلينا الحساب. This is our job, is just to convey the message, to take people to account after. This is Allah's job, right? So you have to be prepared to just try with your parents, your family, in a variety of different ways, and that's it. Be willing to try different ways. Don't keep trying to do the same one, one way. It's like bouncing your head against the wall, expecting the wall to break sometime. No, your head's gonna break, right? So you have to be ready to try different methodologies. So I tried all kinds of things with my parents. I written a book on the true religion of God. The first sort of dawah book, which was used in Riyadh, in the communities, foreign communities, centers. And after about 2 years, I'd wanted to revise it. So I gave it to my parents. My father was an English professor. My mother's English was also very good. She was a math teacher. But so I asked them to just look it over for me. And if you find, anything which is not quite logical, or, it needs correcting, it's incorrect or whatever, let me know. I want to improve the booklet.
MashaAllah.
So they went through it. They identified certain things. So I went and changed these things. They went over it again. I said, okay, fine. So then I asked them after that, so why don't you become Muslims? That was my try through that channel, They said, okay, give us the Quran. So they took a copy of the Quran, and then they started to read that themselves. And actually, when I got my PhD and I had to leave Saudi Arabia and move to the UAE, that's 93, just a couple of years after the Gulf War. I went to Canada, and my parents, when I went to see them, first day, my mom came to me privately and told me she wanted to accept Islam. And she told me, don't tell your father. Let him make his own choice. The next day, my father came and said he wanted to accept Islam. Alhamdulillah. But the point is, from this, is that I asked my mom, because my father explained to me that actually he was a muwahid from the time he was an early teenager. In school, he had studied about logic, because they taught in British schools, they used to teach logic. So he had studied about logic, and he concluded that Jesus couldn't have been God. Not possible. It doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. So he stopped praying to Jesus and only prayed to God. Now his brothers and sisters, they used to call him the atheist. Because if you didn't believe Jesus was God, then you didn't believe in God. But in reality, he was a muwahid. And he remained on that, all the way until that time now when he came and accepted Islam himself. But for my mother, when I asked her why, she said that when I'd come to visit her in Jeddah, they had moved down from Riyadh to Jeddah, and I came from Riyadh, went to see her, and she told me, can you see anything in the house? I said, what do you mean, see anything? She said, when I'm looking around, I see some things moving. I just can't make out what it is, So I said, no, I didn't see anything. What she had done, she had knitted crosses, salib, the cross, knitted it, right? And she hung it over the door coming into the house, door going to her bedroom, door going to the living room, and so on and so on. But she said, she asked me about it, because even though she had put these crosses, it was still there. So I said, well, maybe, in Islam, the Prophet ﷺ had said that we should read Surah Al-Baqarah. It will drive shaitan out of the house. So I said, let me read Surah Al-Baqarah. So I sat in the living room and I read Surah Al-Baqarah. And then I went back to Riyadh and I forgot about it. So she told me then, when you read Surah Al-Baqarah, it left. So for me, that was clear evidence that Christianity was not the answer. It wasn't right. Because were it right, it would have finished it. But if you're reading the Quran, that was enough. So, alhamdulillah.
ما شاء الله شكرا جزاك الله خيرا ولكن مع الأسف الوقت المحدد نحن في المغرب والآن قد جاء المغرب
ها؟
الآن جاء المغرب.
جامعة.
نصلي جماعة إن شاء الله. طيب jazakumullah khairan, kita sampaikan kepada Fadilatul Syekh Dr. Bilal Philip hafizahullah taala wa ra'ah. Dan mohon maaf barangkali dalam perbincangan kita kali ini tidak ada terjemahan secara langsung. Insya Allah kita akan usahakan agar video rekaman ini nanti bisa kita berikan subtitle dalam bahasa Indonesia. Semoga bermanfaat. Barakallahu fikum jami'an. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Sahabat dakwah Binbaz TV, Anda baru saja menyaksikan siaran dari channel Pendidikan dan Dakwah. Dipancar luaskan langsung dari Pondok Pesantren Islamic Center Binbaz Pusat, Yogyakarta. Semoga bermanfaat. Sahabat dakwah Binbaz TV, Anda baru saja menyaksikan siaran dari channel Pendidikan dan Dakwah. Dipancar luaskan langsung